Hello, everybody. This is the very first inaugural episode of Longevity Live. My name's Dr. Priyank Sharma. I go by Dr. Pri. I'm a longevity medicine physician. Found out about longevity medicine a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago, and it blew my mind. Then had my mom, unfortunately, experience some of the issues with the traditional healthcare system, had late stage breast cancer, eventually passed away, and that has shifted my focus fully to longevity. Been seeing patients now for the last couple of years and really am passionate and confident that this is going to be the way that we deliver care in the future. So I wanted to start putting out more content and helping more people, and have a few things on our YouTube channel already. Also have a Substack. I'll link to both of those. And I will be doing these weekly live episodes to both. Really, there's dual purposes. One is that there are folks out there who are looking for help and are not able to get it. I see this stuff on Reddit all the time. So we'll go through a couple of those and just kind of talk about how to interpret some of their blood work, answer some of their questions for them. Some of that could be relevant to folks listening later. And then secondly, there's a lot of news happening in the longevity space, and I just have thoughts. I want to get them out there. So that is the purpose of Longevity Live, and that is who I am. So, gonna show you my website really fast, just so you all are familiar with me, and then we're gonna jump right in. And just two things to say before that. Please, if you enjoy this, or if you want to support, share it, and also, please leave comments, likes. Let me know what you want to hear about as well. I'd love to tailor this towards whatever is most useful for people listening. And of course, this is not medical advice. If you have a medical condition or if you're unsure, please go see a doctor. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen here. As I mentioned, is my website, Vita Veda. We are accepting patients at the time. So if you're interested, please reach out or sign up for a free consultation. Let's hop right into this. Peter Attia, big hero of mine, someone who is really a pioneer in longevity and certainly communicating about longevity. But the man is busy. He goes really deep. He does amazing work. He cannot get to all of the comments on his Reddit, understandably. So I see some of these things and some of these posts, and I want to help out and just give my 2 cents. And perhaps it's helpful for folks like you all listening to see how I think through some of these problems. So here's a post. No idea who this is, by the way. And this is partly why this is not medical advice, is I need more context to truly provide someone medical advice. So educational purposes only, but let's just want to talk you through how I think about this. So this is a 44-year-old person. Don't know if they're male or female. 5'1", more likely male, 207 pounds, doing more cardio, lifting, eating more fiber. Dropped some weight down from about lost 26 pounds. So great job. Continuing to go down there. It's pretty reasonable, significant family history, I would say, of heart disease. This person's mother had a heart attack at 44-year-old, and father died of ventricular fibrillation at 60 years old. So ventricular fibrillation is you die within about a minute. It's when the major part of your heart stops beating in a synchronous way. So what caused that is unclear. Could be heart disease, but 60 is it's not crazy young for a man. 44 is very young for a woman. So we would assume here that this person has a baseline increased heart disease risk. At the moment, we just always assume that's genetics. Could in theory be lifestyle epigenetics, but that's just how medicine treats this so far in the modern day. So this person has had several years of untreated high blood pressure and is on medications for it, so not through lifestyle alone, and had a cardiac IQ panel. They say they posted the ChatGPT summary here. I don't actually see that, but we can at least look through or maybe this is the summary where ChatGPT gives a red, yellow, and green. So kind of going through this. Their question is basically what to treat and focus on, and should they consider a statin or address lifestyle changes. So blood pressure, systolic is looking good. I would love to see the diastolic. We want to see that diastolic below 80. And that's something relatively new in the guidelines, where they used to give you a little wiggle room if you're between 80 and 90 in the diastolic. And the way to think about that, the diastolic is sort of the baseline, the resting blood pressure. It never really goes below that. The systolic is when your heart pumps and pushes through it. So you want that lower number, that resting number, to be lower. because it is the more steady state, if you will, and therefore more impactful. LDL cholesterol, slightly above optimal, we'll talk about in a second. That's the main area where they have a question. HDL cholesterol, 46, triglycerides 65, that's pretty good. Coronary artery calcium score of 0, that's what we want to see. That tells us that at least very low short-term plaque risk. I think ChatGPT is correct here. It doesn't tell us a lot about long-term risk, but certainly in the shorter term, well, it's not 100%, and we can talk about that in a second too. Body mass index, could lose some weight here. Body mass index at 29, assuming this person is not all muscle to get to that 29. And then apolipoprotein B, we'll skip the LDL particle numbers. It's not as helpful here, but apolipoprotein B at 82, LP little a at less than 10. So just really quickly looking at this overall picture from what information we do have, this person does have some slightly higher LDL cholesterol, and it says slightly above optimal, and their ApoB is also borderline in terms of particle risk. So with the ApoB being where it is, just really quickly, ApoB is the protein portion of the LDL cholesterol. So the LDL molecule has both a protein that carries and cholesterol, and the protein is there to carry the cholesterol through the blood. And it's that ApoB that is the protein, and that protein is what interacts with the blood vessel wall and causes the cascade that eventually leads to blockage of the artery. So we could just purely look at the ApoB. We don't necessarily need to look at the LDL-C. Now, in this case, their LP little a is another protein similar to ApoB that is, I don't know all the research, but is even more disease causing than the ApoB. And this one is in the normal range. So we can really just wholly focus on the ApoB. And again, not a lot of other abnormalities there. And so, how do we decide what you should lower your ApoB to? So this is something that I show my patients. This is the source here is Tom Dayspring. He's a great lipidologist. He's been on multiple podcasts, a really great educator in the space. And the real question is, how low do you want this to be if you want to live a long time, to your 90s or hundreds or longer? And this brings up one of the challenges with medical studies is that a lot of studies are done on people who are really sick. But what about somebody who currently, like this patient, is somewhere in the, let's call it 25th to 30th percentile here of ApoB? What should they do to drive their risk down even further? We know people who are really high up are at higher risk of heart attacks. But what about people who are lower? Right. And so from the longevity standpoint, what we do, what Peter Attia does is we say, well, let's just get you like as low as possible, because heart disease is the number one risk of death and disability pretty much everywhere in the world, certainly in westernized countries. And so we want to reduce this risk as much as possible. And we have the tools to do so in a reasonably safe way. But I do want to stress something, because if you read the comments here in this post, there's a lot of talk about, well, should you go on a statin? Should you not go on a statin? How much risk do you have? This person's coronary calcium score is 0. So let's talk through that. What does that coronary calcium score being 0 mean? Here's a great article by Peter Attia that talks about this. And really what we are trying to avoid is the narrowing of the lumen, or the narrowing of that artery in the heart. And what you're seeing here on the screen right now is a coronary CT angiogram. So this is not a calcium score. This is a study where they inject dye, a contrast dye that usually has iodine in it, that lights up the inside of the blood vessel. And you can see where narrowing is happening. Okay, so you could, in theory, have a calcium score of 0 and still have a blockage in your artery. And as you can see here, this is a complete block. This is what leads to a heart attack. So now everything downstream of that blockage is not getting any kind of blood flow, and therefore no oxygen is going to the heart muscle, and that will lead to a heart attack. Okay, but there's a whole process that happens before that, right? So the way that you should think about this cascade is you start seeing microscopic disease in the blood vessel, and that's what this is showing. And then eventually you'll start to see narrowing of it in what's called soft plaque that you pick up through that coronary CT angiogram. And then finally, in some cases, you will get calcifications. And that's what you see here in this coronary calcium score. So why are people doing coronary calcium scores instead of just doing these CT angiograms? Well, they're a lot cheaper and they're a lot less invasive. You don't have to get injected with a dye, and that also makes them cheaper. Coronary calcium scores these days in the US are $100 to $200. These CT angiograms can be $600 to $1,000, and just more risk with that. So I won't go through all this, but this is a great diagram, a series of diagrams that Peter Attia has that talks about how when you have all these particles, these apolipoprotein B particles and these Lp(a) particles floating around in your bloodstream, eventually some of them start interacting with, or continuously interacting with the endothelium, the wall of this blood vessel, and that leads to inflammation. Then you have these inflammatory cells, these monocytes that come in, other inflammatory factors, and eventually an invasion into the wall of these cells that start trying to eat these excess lipids and these excess proteins. And eventually they can't eat them, and eventually they get calcified. I'm skipping over some steps, but what's my point here? My point is, based on this physiology, what you really want to do, if you want to be 100% sure that you are safe, is to drop that LDL and that apolipoprotein B as low as possible. And that's certainly going to be the case in somebody who already has a family history. The way you treat that family history is you say, okay, well, if our normal LDL target was 100, or if we do the longevity target of 62 for ApoB or 70 of LDL, somebody who has a family history, they're already at higher risk. So we want the target to be even lower than that. This is just the normal population. So that's how you apply that family history. And if that is the case, then will that prevent that person from having a heart attack? How much risk are they at right now? Well, I can't tell you 100% how much risk they're at right now based on what we have here. We really would want to see this coronary CT angiogram and say, do their arteries look completely clean to figure out they're at risk? But if, say, one of these arteries is 30% or 50% blocked, then already we can see that they are high at risk. And that would tell me, hey, okay, you already have a blockage, even though it's not showing up yet on a calcium score. That's not something that we want to see. So we would try to reduce that risk almost immediately. Now, the real question comes up, well, what if you get that coronary CT angiogram here and everything looks clean? So the calcium score is 0. We don't see any of that soft plaque that can build up before the calcium score changes. Do we do anything about it? Right? You have an ApoB that's a little bit elevated. As I mentioned, the target's going to be, like, even if they didn't have a family history, the target would be 62 from a longevity standpoint. This person's only 44. If they want to live to 94, you got 50 years to try to avoid a heart attack. So what do you do? Do you take a statin or not? Should I consider a statin now or continue to address with lifestyle changes and see how much better I can get these scores? Well, there's no real answer here. And you'll probably see a lot of people pointing out studies that, well, a statin won't help, or people with higher ApoB are still ending up with or are totally fine. A lot of times there's a lot of studies out there with keto and whatnot. And I think you can get lost into a rabbit hole of what does this study say, what does that study say, and how can we predict it? And you lose the forest for the trees. The reality is all of these studies are a guide to help you determine what you should try to do. Right? So if this person tried a statin and they had 0 side effects, which most people who try statins have 0 side effects, not 100%, but most of them do, then their ApoB, let's say it dropped it down to, 62, right? And they feel fine, they're okay with it, they're really cheap, low dose statin, then great, But if they conversely try the statin and they get brain fog, or they get muscle soreness, or another symptom that feels like it's attributed to the statin itself, then you could stop the statin and say, you know what, I don't think it's worth it. Right? So it comes down to patient choice, and it comes down to risk reward and risk tolerance. Now, if it were me, I would probably just take the statin. I would also continue to address lifestyle. This person has a little bit more weight they could lose, assuming that they're 207 pounds. It depends on what their body fat percentage is. But if they have some body fat, they could lose that. right? But if they say, you know what, I'm tapped out, I'm really busy, I don't have time to do anything more lifestyle wise, let me just take the medication to lower my risk, I think that's very reasonable. The goal is to lower the risk to a point that you feel comfortable and make an informed decision after that. So a few things that I talk about a lot with my patients just sort of embedded here. And I want everybody to, my hope is that you can think of these studies as guidelines, but the true experiment that matters is you. What happens when you take the statin? What happens to your biomarkers when you take the statin, right? Studies are all guides, they're all imperfect, and we can argue until we're blue in the face as to which one is the best or compare it to another one. It's going to happen all the time. It continues to happen. And as we'll see in a little bit, it's happening right now in another hotly debated topic, that of protein. Comp HU num, I will post this to you. I hope you found this helpful. Happy to answer any follow-up questions on that and sort of how I take a look at this and interpret it. All right. Now, couple news items in the longevity space for the next 15 minutes or so, depends on how long it takes to talk through this stuff. I published my third newsletter, Pillars of Longevity Part 2. This is on the lifestyle pillars. Won't go through this all. I'll link this to the show notes. This is my Substack, but what I wanted to point out just, and really a theme of today from the news cycle out there in longevity, is protein. So I made a little note here that strength is more important than muscle mass. I think that it's, really important to consider why you are doing what you are from a longevity and health standpoint. There's really two main things to think about. One is your lifespan. So you want to live longer. And then one is your health span. Like, what do you want to be able to do at those later ages and even now? And so I think strength is obviously very important for example, I like to travel. My goal is to be 110. I know it's ambitious. It's part of why I'm a longevity doctor. I want to be able to go on a plane and still get that overhead bag that bag into the overhead compartment on a plane. All right. I'm going to need some strength to do that when I'm 100 or 110. Will I need muscle mass? It's not clear. Right? So to me, muscle mass matters a lot less than strength from a health span standpoint. So then the other question is, does muscle mass matter from a lifespan standpoint? And this is where we have conflicting evidence. It's a little bit difficult to tell. I have yet to be fully convinced of it. And why does this matter? Because a lot of people are eating a lot of protein, 1 gram per pound or more per day, in order to get more and more muscle mass. And I'm not saying you should or should not eat that much protein. I just think we should base this more on the strength gains that you're getting and maintaining that strength, especially to be able to do the things that you want to later in life. Coincidentally, published this last week. And as I was on Substack publishing it, I came across Eric Topol, who is a kind of a well-known physician, cardiologist here in the U.S. He has this Substack called Ground Truths, and he just published something talking about our preoccupation with the protein intake. And I'm not going to go through all of this. He makes some arguments that protein is going to be bad for you, can cause some damage. Some types of amino acids apparently are causing, potentially put you at higher risk for cancer. And, all of that, I think, is, again, referring back to my earlier comment, I'm not trying to dismiss that. The truth is, it's not fully clear to me. And the way that I get around this is, like, treat yourself as the N of 1, as the experiment. If you're taking a high protein diet, make sure you're getting your biomarkers checked. Make sure you're staying on top of it. People say there's potential kidney damage if you eat too much protein. All right, well, get your kidney biomarkers checked. And if they're going the wrong way, then you can peel back on the protein or balance that with your lifestyle goals. If you're saying, you know what, it's really important for my lifestyle to be like big and strong and look great, I'm okay with the kidney hit. All right, then you're okay with the kidney hit. I think our job as longevity doctors is to inform you, but it is your job as a physician to make that informed decision. Right. So, for me, where this comes down to is not so much these studies are very difficult to do with epidemiology, and there could be an infinite number of studies that try to prove a certain point, and it takes a really long time to disprove that study if you can at all. So again, bring it back to your biomarkers is my main suggestion, and also just make sure you're tying it to your goals and what you want out of your life, because your health is there to support your life. So I'll link to this if you want to read through it. Again, I'm not saying I fully agree with it. I'm just really trying to make the point that protein is in the zeitgeist right now. And in fact, it's so far in the zeitgeist. I'm going to switch over to this one. This is like hilarious. It's funny. About I think a year ago, I listened to the All In podcast. I think it's a great podcast, and they were talking about Ozempic and how people, Starbucks is worried because now a lot of people are losing a ton of weight and they don't want the sugary drinks or an Ozempic. Well, Starbucks has pivoted, my friends. Starbucks is going all in on protein, which is, I think it's better than going all in sugar, but 15 to 36 grams of protein per grande beverage. Look, if we were not sure what a high protein diet does to you before, we're going to find out real quick, because 15 to 36 grams is a lot, right? And then there's going to be a question of like, what kind of protein is it? Or is it a supplement that is, highly regarded? Is it tested? All that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm sure a lot will come up, but certainly it feels like this last week protein has been in the news cycle from a longevity standpoint. So that is the protein side, and I want to call out this newsletter. There's our Longevity Essentials username enice5555 on Reddit. They do a fantastic newsletter here, and I found a few stories out of it. And one that I thought was just like both really funny and super cool is someone here named Scott Hickel, who I believe is maybe the CEO. But there's a company called Throne, and is the first wearable for your toilet. And so this is really cool. So they are the Whoop for your microbiome, right? You get 120 biomarkers for $250 per test with a microbiome, like a standard microbiome test, where you give them a stool sample and they'll do that for you. Looks like it's a monthly subscription, only $6, $400, ships out next year. Is a device that sits on your toilet and will I guess the camera just captures the analysis of your waste, and then it gives you an app and you can track what's going on with your stool. So I think this is probably targeting people who are frequently getting their gut health tested. And generally speaking, as from a putting my doctor hat on, I don't really know what I would do with that data. You probably would be able to tell a lot of this stuff just based on what you're eating or your symptoms, or honestly, even the smell of your stool. I'm not saying it's not useful. I'm just saying it's too early to understand how to interpret that and come up with a new plan, at least from a purely medical standpoint. Or at least I don't know if I'd be getting any data that I would not otherwise have, again, through symptoms and a good diet tracking log. But I will tell you, I love the innovation. If Throne wanted to send me one of these for free, I would 100% use it. I think it'd be cool to check it out. But yeah, I can't tell you exactly the utility at the moment. Although I am a huge microbiome proponent. I think we're going to find out more and more research about it, and it'll be immensely important for our health to understand how to optimize that. I'm just not sure we're there yet from a purely, just from a knowledge standpoint, and incorporating that knowledge and really operationalizing it. But super cool. Congrats to Throne Science here. And it looks like perhaps Scott is related here. But congrats to them on getting this across the line. I love the concept. Really cool over there. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is a hot mic picking up Putin and Xi Jinping, the leaders of Russia and China, respectively, discussing organ transplants and immortality. This has been making the rounds. It's kind of interesting because they were just talking about biotech advancing and the possibility that humans could live to 150 years old in this century. And I think that's very, very reasonable. 150, oldest people have lived about 120. A couple folks live that old. You see hundreds, a few in the 110s. So 150 is not a significant increase from that. Now, people are talking about living forever. I think we're a ways away from that, just from a technology standpoint. But 150 feels very reasonable. I don't know, just it's one of those news stories in the longevity space that I don't think is hyperbole. I think it's, yeah, just actually quite reasonable. So cool to see that. Cool to get that into the mind share out there. I know Brian Johnson retweeted this and was like, "See, I told you we're not going to die." But if I know anything about human biology, it just seems like every time we make an advancement, we learn just even more complexity out there, and that's why I think getting an incremental benefit or a gain to say 150 makes a lot of sense. But getting that next gain to 300 or 500 or 1,000 is going to be much tougher, and I believe it'll take a series of incremental steps to get there. One other thing that I'm going to do a whole separate podcast episode on, not one of these longevity lies, is a potential new blue zone region in Finland stands out for its populace's longevity. And this is really interesting because they're essentially, it's an article in the Journal of Aging Research, and what they're showing is that there's a Swedish part of this area of Finland that I'm not even going to try to pronounce here, that starts with an O, that demonstrates good health and adheres the most to health promoting blue zone lifestyle. And I think what's key here is the word lifestyle, because this is one of the things that I disagree with Peter Attia on, but there's this idea out there that the people who live to 100 or longer in the blue zone, so if you're not familiar, blue zones are the name that was given to a few areas in the world where the populations were incredibly long lived. And importantly, they lived healthy lives for a long time. They just didn't live longer with heart disease or cancer. They just lived longer, period. And some of these blue zones are Okinawa, Japan. Another one was in Nicaragua. Another one was in California. And there's this concept out there that those folks, the only reason they lived longer is because they had better genetics. But that really doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because some of their neighbors, same people, very similar genetics, maybe 100 miles away, were not living as long. So I do think it was more related to their lifestyle. And this is a little bit more evidence for that, as these folks in this area of Finland are living quite a bit longer, and that's changing over time. So it's just interesting to see more blue zones arising. That's it for today. I hope you all enjoyed this. I don't see any comments here on the stream. That's okay. First time doing this. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and in the future I want to incorporate a way for folks to come up on stage and chat as well. But please comment here or on YouTube if you want me to speak to anything else next time. I'll see the news cycle, see what's out there. And if you're interested in me taking a look at your biomarkers and reviewing them, not medical advice, of course, please go ahead and share them if you're okay with them being public. We'll keep it anonymous. And thanks, everybody. See you next week.